Do come in and be seated. We'll start in just a moment. Good evening, everybody. Or evening. Good evening. No. Good morning, everybody. The time changed, but it didn't spring forward that far. You'll be relieved to know it is not 4:30 in the evening. It is 10 o'clock, and you are here, and we are here, and it's good that we are here. Welcome. Some of you were here last night for the Tippy lecture. What a wonderful evening it was. A big thanks again to our St. Spatulas Guild for providing a lovely reception, and another word of gratitude to Winnie Varghese, our Tippy speaker. As you will see, we just brought them in a minute ago, the flyers with some information about Winnie. But Winnie is on the senior clergy team at Trinity Church in Wall Street, on Wall Street in New York City. She is preaching at the 8:45 and the 11 o'clock services. As some of you heard last night, I've had the privilege of knowing Winnie for a number of years, and she reminded us that if you've been to General Convention in the last 9, 12, 15 years, I don't know exactly how many years, you've heard Winnie be the voting secretary and remind us that the vote is closing, the vote is closed. And last night a friend said, have we put that on an app yet? Because we just love to hear that voice. But behind that voice is someone of such great, wonderful faith, and someone who gets intuitively and externally what does it take for the faith we hold in our hearts and our minds to be alive in the world around us. That's something we are passionate about in this church, and so the intersection of our hearts and Winnie's ministry has really already been fruitful this weekend. So help me welcome Winnie back. Winnie.
Well, good morning. It's good to be here again. Good to be here with all of you. I was telling someone yesterday, I've been trying to get to this church for I think over 10 years. I've been working on it, so glad to finally be here. I've heard a lot about all of you and for quite a while, and I'm really loud right now, right? Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, okay. All right, so this morning what we're going to talk about, and I did the same thing yesterday. One of the reasons I wanted to come here is I know you all are a church very much like the one that I come from, the ones that I've been in over the last couple of years. And so what I'm talking to you about is something you know a lot about. So I don't pretend that you don't. I know that about you. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about where we are with some of our work in engaging the border and that crisis. And knowing that you all are thinking about similar things and working hard on it here, and frankly are much closer to the southern border than we are in Manhattan, so have a lot to teach us. But I will tell you where we've been, and one of the gifts of Trinity Church is we're a very well-resourced church, which means that we can convene at a pretty epic scale. And so we have been gathering primates and leaders of the church from across the communion without huge agendas for relationship to work on development, leadership development, and development of their diocese. And we've been doing that at least for 5 years. My guess is longer in some parts of the world. And we've just recently started to expand what was a focus that started with the churches in Africa after Lambeth in 98, which was a particularly difficult Lambeth for us. The first big conflicts around sexuality in the larger communion were 98 in our communion. And so Trinity was asked quietly at the time if they could help with working on those tensions into the future so that we wouldn't, frankly, completely fall apart as a communion. And so the reason Trinity could do that is we're not an official body of the Anglican Communion. We don't have any authority. We're not making any decisions. It doesn't really matter what we think. We're a parish. So we could invite people to come together privately, and there was no scandal in coming together at one of our meetings, and we would have it somewhere neutral like Spain, where there wasn't where the weather was really good and you weren't taking a side if you showed up in Spain. And we brought together some of the bishops and primates who had been in conflict with each other at Lambeth, the ones that were willing to come together, and just started conversations. And after a couple of years of conversation and us staying in conversation primarily with the bishops in Africa that were willing to come, we were asked if we would help them think about the development of their own diocese so they could develop their own voices and not be as vulnerable or susceptible to external forces with agendas and money, which is a great thing to say to us because we're absolutely that. But also people that really were trying to manipulate opinions on the ground and kind of present a very particular perspective of our communion in the larger life of the church. So we got into that. We're doing it for a while. And about 5 or 6 years ago, it became a concern to us that we weren't engaging the rest of the communion. So it was Canada, the US, some parts of Africa that were willing to talk to us. So we decided to extend into Latin America and the Caribbean, Asia, and just start relationships, just start talking to people. Those aren't the parts of the communion that we think about when we think about the International Anglican Communion. But for some of us, quite resident. Like I'm from India, I'm an Anglican from India, so yes, let's go to Asia, right? And that there are many, many different perspectives the further out you get, and the contexts are just so different. We're not all English or Anglophile. We have very different stories of origin about how Anglicanism comes to where we are or we become Anglican. It's a really wonderful diversity. So that said, just to set the stage for why the thing I want to start with happens, we have a pretty brilliant priest at Trinity who is a Portuguese and Spanish speaker, and he's from Jamaica. And so Mark Bazzuti Jones, is probably the biggest personality I've ever seen contained in an Episcopal priest. He was trained as a Jesuit before he became an Anglican. He leads our work in Latin America and the Caribbean. So again, English, Spanish, Portuguese, right? And he has gone and made relationships in all of these parts of the church. In the Caribbean, that's the legacy of the British colonial church, legacy of slavery and the slave trade. In the Caribbean, often these are brand new churches. They're small, they're just emerging. Some are Episcopal, expat churches, OPEC and fruit company kind of churches. Others are just brand new Protestant churches in their contexts. And wonderfully, the people they serve are the people that can't go to the Roman Catholic Church, can't go to the Pentecostal, conservative, evangelical churches, which are growing fastest. It's often single mothers or divorced women, indigenous people, and in some places, LGBT people. To me, kind of the dream church, right? Like that's who's coming to church. Why wouldn't we want to support that part of the Anglican communion? We don't have to do the legacy of colonialism. We just get to be the best, right, from the beginning. So we're starting to do that work. We're all very energized by it, and we're Americans, right? We live in the Americas. This is the American church finding voice, which we also find very, very compelling, and we are responsible, as Americans, for a lot of what happens in Central America, and so in every way, very resonant for us. So we end up in a convening in Cartagena in Central America. And so in this convening, we have people from South America, Central America, the Caribbean, some people from around the world that have come to kind of make the conversation more diverse. And as we are in Eucharist every day, led by Brazil, Colombia, Honduras, Guatemala, Belize on different days, Puerto Rico, Mexico, right? We hear the voices of the primates of those areas saying to us over and over, what you call an invasion, right? We call an exodus. And break our hearts more effectively, right? That people are fleeing. We know why there is chaos in our countries. We know why our contexts are the contexts they are, but it is our people. Primate after primate after primate would say, our people, or our people coming through our lands, our nations, towards yours. And we know there is nothing for them when they get there. They know their dreams of who you are not true. This is why I use the language of their faith in us and who we are as a nation is so much greater than who we actually are. But as primate after primate said that, this exodus of people coming towards you, and how will you serve our people? Like I said yesterday, I technically know how this is happening. I know why we have this situation in Colombia or Guatemala or Honduras, El Salvador that we do, Nicaragua. I know. And I know these primates, I know these bishops. We've been in meetings with them over a couple of years. But there was something about when I heard them say, our people, right? In the same way that we have people, right? We all have our people. And they're coming to you for freedom, right? For hope. And how will you care for them? That I have to say, I was convicted again, right? Of what our responsibility is from this side, and how we help people and accompany people as they're traveling. So this was in the time of the caravans. Remember those? The caravans that were going to invade this country, that they were calling an exodus of their people. And if they were trying to convict us, it worked very, very well. And the bishop of northern Mexico and western Mexico, which is the diocese that hit our southern border, beautiful, wonderful, gentle, kind people in very small, under-resourced dioceses. In western Mexico, I believe, that's primarily expat Americans who have gone to Mexico to retire on the coast. That's what the Episcopal Church is. And you go to retire there because it's more affordable than retiring in Southern California. So these aren't extraordinarily wealthy people, but Americans. So they're trying to build out a diocese with a lot of retired clergy. Not a bad way to go if you're thinking about where to retire. Building up the church in western Mexico, that's Juarez, that's San Diego, but it goes all the way across to Nogales in Arizona, a little bit further east than that. And then northern Mexico is probably the part that you are more familiar with. I'm from Texas, so that's Matamoros and I think all the way to Juarez, I think. So that corridor that comes up on the east coast of Mexico, those bishops have said that they are overwhelmed in the same conversation by people coming into their diocese in enormous need, refugees from Central America coming up through Mexico, and all the crime that comes around that because they are so vulnerable, right? They are vulnerable to people that come to act upon them, and that this has now become enormously disruptive in their dioceses, which are very small and under-resourced, and literally planting churches. So you'll see one priest, 3 churches, enormous buildings they built, and people want to come, but they don't have enough clergy, they don't have enough capacity to be as robust as they need to be. And so they're trying to build their own church as this is happening. And then thousands and thousands of people are showing up, desperate, with nothing but the clothes on their back, and stories of enormous trauma with their families showing up. And for you to just to illustrate the level of crisis that people are living in, one of the priests we met in Juarez, who was actually from working closer to Matamoros, but came out to Juarez with us because we had come into San Diego and to Juarez to see how we could help. No, not Juarez, excuse me, Tijuana. That's how far across she had come. She'd come all the way over to Tijuana. And just full of life. Like one of these people that you know, like she's amazing. Her church is amazing. I'd go to church there. You could just tell. She's one of these huge personalities. She had decided in her church, because she is fearless, she's surrounded by cartels, that she would be a shelter, she would provide shelter for women, because so many women are traveling by themselves. So she does. She just opens her church up. Women are sheltered there. She realizes people have nothing to do, which creates another kind of crisis. So she starts a bakery. They're making food together. They're selling the food. They're starting to create some income, which means they have income. The church has some income. They can make a sustainable thing where they are. And so she had come to Tijuana to help them think about how they would provide shelter. And they have a much bigger problem. So many people have come. The volume is so high and have been coming for so long. So she comes and she is inspiring. Everybody's inspired. We can imagine what we can build there. We have a couple of models of what we could do, and they're just going to think about what they'd like to do. They need some building and shelter. We can help with that. The government of Mexico will help with that. The local jurisdiction will help. The university will help. Very exciting meeting. Do some emails afterwards. We love her. Yay for Google Translate. We get to communicate directly with her. She goes home last year. You know this isn't going to end well, right? She's still alive, but you know it's not going to end well. She then builds a bakery. She is standing up to local cartels and to local government. She's just fierce. Like people will come to take people from her site, and she will refuse them, or they will come and insist that she pay them some kind of bribe or offering, right, to be kept safe, and she refuses. Just fearless woman. And we received an email at the end of the year last year. That took a minute for us to understand because it was sent from the diocese that they had killed her son, 16. Her son was just found dead. No story around it. Everyone's keeping it kind of quiet. It didn't make the big Anglican news service reports because we're worried about her safety and her husband's safety. But that's the kind of real terror they live within. And what a way to get to her, right? They didn't kill the priest, because that actually becomes a problem. They didn't kill her husband, right? They killed the child. Because you can accuse that child of all kinds of things. You can say whatever was up. But they killed that child. It's an act of terror. One of the privileges of working at a place like Trinity is that we get to meet people at that level on the ground as they're trying to build and protect and develop where they are. She's not someone any of us would know. She's a local priest in a small place, a powerful priest. I'm happy to share her contact information with anyone that wants to know her, because it's a place you want to support if you can support, and it's on your side. It's very close to Matamoros. But those are the kind of heroic people that are doing the work on that side. And part of what's happening is, as you know, if you go up to Matamoros, it's the fastest way to the border, to a U.S. Checkpoint. It's where Sister Norma and everyone has been. It's the shortest route when you come up the East Coast. And so it's where all of the danger is, right? It's where all the people that are predators upon these vulnerable people are parked and camped out. It's very, very dangerous to do it that way, but it's really fast. And so people risk it because it's fast. Or you can go up the other way on the West Coast, up through Tijuana, same. It's extremely dangerous. There are people that are predators watching out for them. But you get to Tijuana and it's big. And California is big. And there is a sense that California is more hopeful, that if you can get to California, you might have an opportunity, which isn't actually true, but it is what people believe. And when I lived in Los Angeles, I met so many people who had walked from Ecuador or further south, walked as children with their parents and come to California. So that is also a story that is known, that you can make it, and that there are people there that will receive you, which again, is not true anymore. You can't cross that border in the same way, but people keep coming. But if you go up the middle, which is actually safer, because it's harder and it's desert, it takes longer. But if you go up the middle and you come into New Mexico or you come into Arizona, it's actually more possible that you might actually cross a border, legally or not legally. So crossing actually at a checkpoint in Nogales or somewhere like that, Silver City, it's a little bit more likely because there's so much less volume that the people at the border can actually work with you and figure out what your story is. You're more likely to be able to file a claim and go through the actual legal process in our country. But you've got to be able to survive that wilderness to get to that place. So the Diocese of Northern Mexico and Western Mexico are working really hard as a very, very under-resourced part of the church to figure out how to create the right resources in those middle places in particular to help people. Interestingly, in Nogales, you might already know this, I didn't know this. So Nogales is the Arizona border. There's a Nogales in Arizona, there's a Nogales in Mexico. That is where the majority of LGBT people that get through. It's in Nogales. Border Patrol will warn, kind of let people know in advance that a new group is coming. And there are safe houses. The Diocese of Arizona is partnering on one of those safe houses. And they literally will do the paperwork. Episcopal priests that go across, it's beautiful work, right? And volunteers of many kinds go across and just do the paperwork. And for our own confusion of what Border Patrol is, Border Patrol has given some of our colleagues, literally given them the laptop, the official laptop, to say, help us get the paperwork done. The volume is the problem in some of these places. So there's enormous opportunity for partnership. And as I was saying yesterday, the demons aren't always where we think the demons are, right? There are demons in this, absolutely. There's some real evil in it. And there's some real good all the way across of people trying very hard to do good. But we know, all of us kind of know these extremes a little bit better. And so what we have done in the last couple of years is tried to figure out where Episcopalians can engage at the border in ways that would mobilize and sort of politicize the whole church. And for those of you closer to the border, I think it's important that you all are part of this work, because all over the country, we're just hearing stories, right? We don't know a lot about what actually happens down here and where people land and where they're held. So we have been in Ciudad de Juarez, which is El Paso, the El Paso border, and in Tijuana by San Diego. And I would have chosen to go to Brownsville because I'm such a fan of Sister Norma, who I'm sure you all know, and that great long work of Episcopal Charities there, but we didn't get to go there. And I know that the Diocese of Rio Grande as well, which is where El Paso is working on some way to create pilgrimage and service opportunities for people to go and see the border itself, to go and see the beauty of that landscape and the history of the peoples that have lived on both sides of that border, for as long as we know that people have lived in that place, to see the river, to love that border as much as those of us that know a little bit do. The Diocese of Arizona has an organization called Cruzando Fronteras, and that was a small group until a couple of months ago. Now they're raising money for it. That's another place where, as I said, LGBT people are coming to Nogales, and they are building shelter on the Nogales side, substantial shelter, with the cooperation of the Nogales local government with psychological services and medical services and job training services, with the reality that most of the people that come to that border will be staying in Mexico. They're going to live in Mexico. They're not going to be crossing that border, but are so traumatized by the journey that has taken them there and the years before that journey, that if we don't really think about health and their well-being and the flourishing of their families, that there will be crisis in Mexico for quite a long time into the future. So that shelter is being built right now. It's a ministry you might find interesting. I find it very compelling. We're figuring out how we can get involved from Trinity. They are funding that through the Diocese of Arizona. And in addition to building a place and building those services and creating volunteer opportunities for people, they also want to create a pilgrimage opportunity through Arizona, through that desert, and then to that site. So it's something to think about if you're trying to take people for an experience of this site. You can do it in Texas, but it's really Roman Catholics that are doing that work, and it's excellent work. But if you're looking for a way to do that through the Episcopal Church, and frankly, I think we need some help in the Episcopal Church to get some courage around doing this kind of work and building it and knowing that our people are interested. I think Arizona is really demonstrating it in a way that if they can be successful in it, the Diocese of Rio Grande can do the same. It would take more for them. It's a heavy lift for them. It's a heavy lift for San Diego. It's a heavy lift for the diocese on the Texas border. But we can do it, and we need to do it. And we're in a moment where I think we've got all the right bishops to do it, frankly. We've got bishops that are quite moved by that work, but Arizona is leading the way. So in Juarez, it's literally, they're trying to build churches to run their own church. Like they could barely do what they need to do to be a diocese, and on top of that are trying to figure out how they serve, and serve with such, and they do it anyway, with just compassion. The streets of Juarez in certain neighborhoods are just full of people that have just come and are waiting. And so all kinds of spaces are used. It's just as many beds as you can line up. People will sleep in them waiting. And when we were there, we met people who had been deported recently and were just waiting at the border, had lived in the US for 20 years, their kids were in the US, spouses were in the US, could not believe they wouldn't go back to the US. They knew no one in Mexico, so just slept in a bed with 50 other guys in the room because the beds were all lined up, just little pieces of fabric on the ground, just waiting to go home. Couldn't imagine staying where they were. And all along that border in Juarez are people just waiting to cross. And Juarez is amazing because it's that fence right there. You can see the United States from where they're camped. You're looking every day at the place that you intend to go, but it's never going to happen. It's just never going to happen. When you see the numbers that people have, they're just not going to be crossing that border. One of the most moving experiences for me in Juarez was we walked right up, and there's an encampment right by the wall, the fence. And it looked like all of the other encampments. And everywhere in the world I've been where there are refugees, it's almost as though there's an industry in creating these encampments. They look the same everywhere in the world, right? It's the same materials, little camping tents that aren't really made for the weather, a little bit of corrugated metal, some tarp, same everywhere. So we walk up to this one, and I don't even know why. I think we were just trying to understand the landscape of this place. We're with the Primate of Mexico, the Bishop of Western Mexico, a bunch of us from Trinity, this woman who has described, the priest from near Matamoros. As we're walking up, I was thinking, how much these just look like. These look like folks that you'd see on the street in Los Angeles. Like what a hip crowd we're walking into in really tough circumstances, but they just look really cool. And it took me a minute, it's like, oh wait, we have found the LGBT encampment. This is a bunch of queer folks. That's why they look so cool. You know, all kinds of, it says something about me, I just they look really cool. And living in really, really harsh circumstances. I don't want to downplay that, but I had a moment of like, right, literally, these are just people just like us. Like these are folks you could imagine at the heart of your town, right? And at the coolest part of town, going to the coolest parties, except that those are the only clothes they have and they're desperate and they have no money and God knows how they're surviving and they're surviving in very tough ways. So we're standing there kind of, all of us having the same kind of, wait, we just figured out where we are and what's going on. And the Primate of Mexico, who was weeping, right? This is his country, it's his people, stood in the middle of this place full of people that are doing God knows what to survive and are subject to God knows what at the hands of the police and the military and everything else, sitting on this border. He goes in the middle of them and takes some hands and starts to pray. And literally, people just start to come out of the tents. They can hear him. And then this woman starts the Our Father. The bishop didn't start it, right? This woman starts it loud. And people just start to pick it up all over this huge encampment and start to literally pouring out of their tents to come and stand with him and pray the Our Father together. It's beautiful, right? It was interesting to me that there was a whole bunch of priests feeling helpless standing there at how overwhelming this suffering was. And this woman who lived in that place just started to do the thing that actually we should have done. That's kind of what we're there for. Reminded us of who we are, the power of the church, the power of prayer to join us. And so she did it. And it's almost as though when she finished, we all remembered who we were, right? He got serious, his voice got bigger, and he prayed for them profoundly, right? And blessed them, which is what they'd come for. And then everybody lined up to receive his blessing. In a place where we could not have imagined if you had asked that we had anything to say, that anyone cared who we were, right? That the things we knew how to do mattered at all. Clearly, the only thing we knew how to do was the only thing they wanted, right? Like, actually, people came to be honored and blessed and seen by the church. And it was really, literally all we could do, and felt helpless that it was all we could do. It was beautiful, beautiful that they met us and we met them on that border. I had a similar experience in El Paso, where we'd been in Juarez, which is equally difficult. In Juarez. And we were at Resurrection House in El Paso, which is a great demonstration if you want to see something that you can be a part of or want to support. Run by Catholic Charities. Catholic Charities in the Rio Grande Valley is epic. They are everything you want Catholic Charities to be. And it's run by a man who has had a kind of an illustrious career and decides to come home and work with people that are crossing the border and then kind of stuck in El Paso. And so Resurrection House is attached to an enormous Catholic church, very close to the border. It's a huge facility. They take volunteers, which is why I mention it everywhere I go. It's very easy to volunteer there. If you go with Sister Norma, it's a little bit more complicated to volunteer. You got to find your way. And it's probably righteous that you need to find your way if you want to work with them. If you go to Resurrection House, you can sign up for a week. You can get an Airbnb or put everybody up in a hotel. It's very affordable to be there. And they need you for a week. They need people. You never know when people will be released from detention. While we were there, 5 buses showed up while we were there that they had not anticipated when we had scheduled coming to be there. They need people to do everything, to make food, to do all the basic needs, and to call and help make connections for people. But when we were there, we got a lecture about how it works, that detention centers let people go when they want to, and they are just released. So Resurrection House arranges for buses to pick people up so they're not released to the street in El Paso, and take them to places where they can call their relatives or friends that are the reason they were given the beginning of the asylum claim process. If you don't have any reason, if you don't have a legitimate claim, you don't get released, you are sent back. So these are all people that are working the process correctly, right? They're people that have a right to be here, but as you can imagine, cannot imagine how things work here. And so they come to Resurrection House where they make a call to the people that they should be connected to and their families, get them a bus ticket, and you work out how they're going to make all the connections on those buses, which is something Sister Norma's crew does as well, right? How do you figure out how to transfer at a bus station if you've never been in this country before, right? You don't, right? So they do all of those pieces there, get people clean food and let them sleep for a couple of days and have their kids be safe. So we had just come for a lecture. We're trying to stay out of the way, understand how it works. We're going to leave. We had just arrived. Of course, we get there, and there are television cameras there because a bunch of people had just been released from detention. So I think many of those buses were going to different places. 3 to 5 came to where we were. So halfway through our conversation, they say, right, we'll need this space. If you could just excuse us. So we walk to the back. Before we can get out of the room, all of these people walk in, sun exposed. Right? They've just been outside for a long time, that skin that you get from being out in the elements. Kids, families that look shell-shocked. Just shell-shocked. They'd been released from detention, heads down, had no idea what this place was that they had come to after the last place they had been, right? Who knows how long they had been held in detention, sitting down, finding their way, people bringing food and water, and like they were going to be all right, you know. So again, all of us shell-shocked, again, as well, traumatized. We don't know what to do with what we've just seen. So we go stand in the front, and again, a bunch of church people, right? Me and some other priests, and we all I realize that I'm standing out there in this, and we're all standing facing away from each other. I think maybe so we won't all have to see each other cry. I don't know. We're literally all facing away from each other in this small room, lay people, all of us, and silent because of what we've just seen. We have no idea what to do. It seems to be the theme in my life. We're just shocked. And this man comes by with his daughter. She had to be 3. And they're starting to walk through, and you can't not smile when you see a 3-year-old walking by. But we're still all silent, and I see her. And she smiles at us, and looks up and looks at all of us, all these adults, silent, looking away from each other. And she says in the brightest, sweetest little 3-year-old voice, "Hola!" And we all do exactly that. We're like, all right, oh, hola, hola, right. We're supposed to be welcoming you, right? This is our country. We're fine, right? We have no problems. Right, exactly, right, hospitality, right? Which is just the lesson of my life over and over and over again, that you go somewhere to try to figure out how to be of help and to understand and to connect, and we are so often, as Americans, then just stuck. How could we possibly help? How could we do enough, right? And then reminded by the people we've stepped out to go and meet of our own humanity because they haven't forgotten theirs. So I sort of commend to you, if that's the right way to say that there are some excellent ministries. I know that you all are part of excellent ministries on the border, but some really powerful ones that could use your support, frankly, and are looking for support from around the church, either in your participation or your sharing or however you might want to bear witness. Beautifully set up. And Resurrection House also does a very good job when you go on pilgrimage there of taking you to the border itself. Now, I'm from Texas, my partner's from Arizona. The border is beautiful. It is a beautiful part of the heritage and landscape of this country. Beautiful, beautiful landscape, beautiful people. It's not just a site of trauma. And so they make a point of taking you out to go on some hikes and to see that land and to pray for its healing, to believe in it again. It is a wonderful way to begin the work of healing of our national narrative of what the place of our southern border is. So I just wanted to tell you those stories. I know you all have a lot as well. Happy to, you can ask questions, I might not have answers, and happy to open up any conversation that's useful.
Thank you. Similar to last night, before we answer or ask questions or make comments, if you have been a part of our church's sanctuary efforts, or if you have been to the border to engage in this work, would you raise your hand and let us see anybody who's done that in sanctuary? Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And it's a timely, our sanctuary ministry began in response to some individuals in our community who had expressed a need for physical sanctuary. And so our congregation said, our vestry said, we can do that. We have resources to offer. But it wasn't just that. It was a commitment to continuing the work of praying for, of supporting those who are vulnerable, and to demonstrating our willingness to support them. But we're right at that moment in our sanctuary ministry where we've put some things in place, and now we're looking for what's next. And so what a great and timely connection. Also, David Jolliffe would want me to remind you that the next event in our Tippy cycle builds upon this. The Saturday of Easter week, it's April the 18th, a community conversation from several individuals who have been to the border, who have engaged in this work, who are going to lead us in a conversation about what is it that we can do to build upon this. So thank you, Winnie. What questions or comments might you have for Winnie or for us today? Thank you. Yeah, hold on just a second. No, you've got to use it. It's your favorite, I know.
I just wondered if you did ecumenical work down there, worked with other. I have friends from the Grace Presbytery in Texas that are there.
I'd say the Presbyterians, I mean, I'm sure I'm not at all aware of everything that's happening on the border, but I'd say the Presbyterians, the Roman Catholics, are winning if that were a contest. I mean, they are present and powerful and compassionate at that border. So you probably know in Brownsville, and people have just decided to go. They're allowed to go across that border. They have the power and privilege of crossing it all the time, so they do. Right? I have colleagues that are just renting apartments in Brownsville. People that come down from Dallas and they just claim some space or get an Airbnb, go to Costco with with money in their accounts from their friends in Dallas, make food, take it across, and they're just in relationship with people, and they're not going to let them die waiting in Mexico to be seen by our government. And I get so beautiful that I think we forget what power we have. And overwhelmingly, frankly, it's Protestant and Catholic women that are doing that work in the Texas border. And it's not necessarily organized by churches, right? The volunteers these women are organizing it, and which is right on. Maybe it's how work has always happened in the church, but it's very, very compelling. And what I love about it is it's not waiting for our government to get it right, because that's going to take some time. They just know that there's some hungry people, and they can't cross, so they cross the other way. I know doctors that are doing it, and nurses, and acupuncturists, and people that are bringing food and clothing and shelter, and keeping the stories very concrete and real. It's really, really human and humane. The challenge for us that aren't on that border, and I feel it as someone, I can talk to my friends from Dallas, but I live in New York, is it's hard to engage that if you're not close. But it is, I think, actually some of the most compelling work happening. So we've been looking for slightly larger institutions that we can work with so that we can have a way to, I found it hard to sell that we're gonna get an Airbnb and see what's needed for a week. Find it a little bit easier to sell from where I am, that there's a pilgrimage that I can invite you to in a certain place. So we're a little bit more involved in that side. But I also think it's a moment where a lot of churches like ours, and the Methodists are doing this as well, I'm sure many I don't know of, are trying to decide what to build, because that work is going to be there for a long time, and we can build on our side and on the Mexico side and plan to serve for a very long time. Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Oh, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, Winnie. Thank
Hello.
you so much. I have a question about Resurrection House. Sometime at the beginning of last summer, maybe my husband remembers when, I can't remember when, but I went with a group of people to El Paso, specifically to volunteer with Annunciation House.
Oh, excuse me. Maybe that's what I'm thinking. Sorry.
Which is...
Keep going.
Hmm?
I think I meant to say Annunciation. I was thinking resurrection doesn't sound right.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so here's my question. So when we went, at first we were doing everything that you talked about, and they had established pop-up shelters, could be a motel or a hotel, and it was really wonderful. And then we started noticing that the buses filled with people weren't coming.
Yes.
And one morning I remember walking into the Annunciation House, and everybody who volunteered and worked there was just sitting at a table,
Yep.
and we were all terrified because there were no people.
Yep.
And we didn't know about MPP. We didn't know that that's actually what had happened. The
Yep.
return to Mexico had started. So I
Yep.
guess my question to you is, we kind of found ourselves out of a job, and
Yep.
it was such a wonderful thing.
Yes.
When you were there, was that prior to MPP?
It was, and we EDS at Union, and I think it is Annunciation House. I was thinking it didn't sound right to me. There wouldn't be a church called that. That EDS at Union went this January. So the Episcopal Divinity School took a group down, and I think one of the reasons that they have come up with the hikes and taking people to Mexico, more of a real pilgrimage experience, is because there are fewer people to find in the actual shelter. There's still people in the shelter, but they're not being that same kind of being dropped off isn't happening anymore, because you can't get across. Very few people are getting across. But as you know, the other part of their work is legal advocacy and trying to get people's asylum claims actually heard. It's one of the toughest jurisdictions in the country. Almost no asylum claim is approved in El Paso. So they've shifted some of their focus, but they also now are, if you go, they will take you to Mexico. So they've created a different experience.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes. I'll be right back, Peter.
Hello, my name's Janet. We were just in Brownsville. It's like you said, it wasn't a church group.
Yeah.
I went as part of Poor People's Campaign, just as a volunteer, and I met Sister Norma. She was in Brownsville, which is her home, speaking. There was a Brownsville festival. So anybody can go. I'll take you if you want to go to Brownsville. Like you said, you rent a Airbnb and you go to the tent courts and you see your government in action. Horrible, horrible action against these very vulnerable people. So.
Did you drive or did you fly? How'd you get
drove.
there? Yeah, you guys are close enough.
15
to go.
hours.
Yeah.
She drove.
15 hours.
15, yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Peter?
I keep coming back to what you talked about in the beginning of the Exodus,
Yeah.
because I keep thinking if I lived in Guatemala and Honduras, I would love to stay, because that's my home, that's where my family is. I wouldn't want to go on a 2,000-mile trip. That's dangerous. What is the Episcopal Church doing? What can we do to allow people the opportunity to actually stay in their home place?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, as you know, yeah, my parents are immigrants from India. You know, if we could work in the place we were from, I'd want to be there. Now that's, you know, we don't come from a place that you don't want to live. You know, it's a beautiful place to live, and that's my experience of almost all, not all. Some immigrants definitely are people up for an adventure, which is cool, but these are not people up for an adventure. These are folks risking everything for an impossible journey. Frankly, the real work, and this is what the leaders there and the bishops from Central America tell us as well, and it's what I've understood, is there are a lot of factors that keep Colombia and Guatemala and Honduras, Nicaragua unsafe. And it's not just their internal politics, right? Our government has a lot of influence in that. Their government definitely does. There are cartels, that's real, right? There is drug crime. It can be for many people a terrifying way to live, and a lot of people are fleeing. Some people are fleeing and will say they just couldn't figure out how to eat. One of the stories I had, I was going to put it in my sermon at 11:15, I guess I still could, I talked to a guy once and he said things were just so expensive where I was from, that's why I'm here now. And so I was quiet for a minute, I was thinking, right, and my assumptions were right, housing, you know, college is expensive. And so I said, so what's expensive? And he looked at me like I was insane and said, well, food. Like, oh, right. Like I was thinking some of the extras that are nice to have were costly and he wanted a better standard of living. He was talking about starving. You know, so unless we have a way to, you know, or unless we're willing to be real advocates for, and Trinity was in the 80s, modifying how our government exists in Central America and then working for the development and robust democratic development of that part of the world, where we have, I mean, our government has had a hand, if not the strongest hand, in taking those democracies apart, frankly. We've generated this thing, and it's sort of a, you could say it's sort of how it works, right? Often when you cause the problem comes back to you. We've taken away the capacity for people to live with dignity in the places that they are. We haven't personally done it, but our government has, and people have come back to Babylon basically to say, we need your help. And so I don't think it's not possible. I do think it's possible, right? I think it's possible to be about the development of those places that people are coming from. Absolutely, absolutely. We have not shown any will to do it. I don't know that this government's going to do that, but that's what we'd have to do. Because I don't know anyone that doesn't want to go home. And I'm from Texas. The way migrant work used to work is that people came for the season to pick in Texas, go all the way up to Iowa sometimes, right? Sometimes come all the way out to New York, go into California, and then go home. And because the border was more flexible, and build houses at home, and it meant their kids were being educated in Mexico, and they stayed, and they could build a life in the second or third generation of the people that had come to do that work. And as we've changed our border laws, we have actually made it impossible for people to move in that way. We've made the mobility impossible, so they're trapped here, and then we're angry with them for being trapped here, when really people would love to go home and settle at home. I've not talked to anyone that didn't want to do that if they could imagine that home could be safe. So that, to me, it's a wonderful way to take it. It's a little bit harder for me to imagine how we impact American foreign policy effectively, quickly enough, but right on, you're right. I mean, there shouldn't be just one safe place on this planet, right? A couple of safe places, and everyone else has to live in some kind of precarity, and that's not right either.
One or two more. Oh, one or two more. Questions or comments? Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. My name is Denise, and I was curious, okay. Yeah, I was curious, with folks going down to the border, what is the most effective thing that we could actually do down there when we're there, rather than people just showing up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good question. I mean, I know actually that Sister Norma has struggled with this, that you get a lot, I mean, and that people want to help, they don't know how to help. And I think she's wonderful at saying, it is important just to bear witness, just to show up, not let people be demonized, be part of the force, in American life, saying that, telling the true story, like hearing true stories and telling true stories. But frankly, people, in Brownsville this is true, and in a different way in Juarez. It was a little bit harder in a different way in Tijuana, but definitely true in Brownsville and in Matamoros, is there's just really concrete human need. People are hungry, and no harm is being caused by cooking food and giving it to them, finding a way to feed them. And people can tell you their stories. And people need stuff, like pretty basic things. Sister Norma always has an Amazon list going through a couple of groups. You can always, and you get an email of when they need diapers, and these calls go out. There's just really concrete social service kind of need on the border. And again, I find Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley the easiest to work with, because they communicate really clearly what they need all the time. And that's both on both sides, in El Paso and in Brownsville. But the need is across the board. And those two places can help you to figure out exactly where you can plug in. In Arizona, they're trying to build a significantly sized shelter in Nogales for people, and they're in the middle of raising the money for that and figuring out resource for that. And I'm sure they're looking for partners. If you all want to be in that conversation with them, that's going to be quite a substantial thing in Nogales. And I think it's quite a compelling thing to be a part of. And then in San Diego, I don't know quite as well. So there are a couple of different ways to support. And I know in Juarez, they're trying to think through what it should look like for the Episcopal Church to have a witness in that diocese to migrants coming, because these are not migrants that are from, well, if they are from Mexico, they're from far away. They're settling now in that place. So there are kind of Episcopal connections that can be made. There's showing up Catholic Charities kinds of connections to be made. And as you discern, I think it would be quite powerful if you all discern what your ministry is here, where you think there's some real resonance culturally with which one of these ministries. And I'm not naming the Methodist and Presbyterian ministries because I don't know them as well, but I know that they also have had a long-term presence on the southern border, particularly in Texas.
Thank you. What you can join us in is shaping the next chapter of that ministry. So if you have a passion for this, let your passion be heard. Don't wait on the institution to make it happen. Help steer us. We've got a number of people and some resources that are available to do just this, and we are discerning what God's calling us to do next. So if you'd like to be a part of that, you can join our sanctuary group. We meet pretty regularly during the week, and we also share communication with one another electronically. But if that's something you'd like to do and you haven't signed up for that, reach out to our church office, reach out to me, reach out to Anna Andrews, who's in the back. Her hand is being waved boldly. Anna Andrews, reach out to Anna Andrews. She's the convener of that group, because we'd love for you to join us in that work. Thank you all very much. Let's say thank you to Winnie. Thank you. Thank you all very much, and don't forget to join us again on the 18th of April for that community conversation. Thank you.